But really over the last 10, 12 years, post-MBA at Salesforce, where I worked in CRM. For the last few years, I was at Microsoft, where I worked on backup and disaster recovery software. And over the past year or so, I've been at Google, where I work on Google Cloud Security products, who were in the role. And that's when I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I also had the opportunity to work with engineers while not actually writing code. How many of the products that you use are actually built out of India? So you need to know a little bit about all of these disciplines, but you don't necessarily have to be an expert at any one of them.
Hi Siddharth, thank you for being here. Really excited to get to know about your PM journey and any tips that you have for our community. So starting off, can you tell us a little bit about your journey so far?
Yeah, well, first of all, good morning. Thanks for having me here, Dia. So I'm a quintessential Mumbai boy. Grew up playing cricket in narrow gullies, riding overcrowded trains, having more vada pavs than I'd like to admit on camera. And then I got my degree in electronics engineering from Mumbai University, and then followed that up a few years later with an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management. But really over the last 10, 12 years, my career has been about building enterprise software and services, right? So I started my career at Mu Sigma, where I was a decision scientist, and I helped solve problems in supply chain risk and marketing for Fortune 500 companies. Followed that up with my first PM gig post-MBA at Salesforce, where I worked in CRM. For the last few years, I was at Microsoft, where I worked on backup and disaster recovery software. So really software catering to IT admins, and more specifically backup and disaster recovery admins. And over the past year or so, I've been at Google, where I work on Google Cloud Security products. So I own 3 products right now, and I'll be happy to talk more about what I do.
Okay, awesome. So before you tell us a little bit more about what you do at Google, why did you choose PM as a field?
Yeah, well, it happened. I know like young graduates these days have 10-year career plans. Like I didn't have one. I didn't even know what a product manager was when I graduated. And I knew a couple of things. One, I was always drawn to technology. So I knew I wanted to work in the tech industry. But I wasn't clear on whether I wanted to be an engineer. I thought I would make an okay engineer, but I wouldn't necessarily have been world class. And I really was ambitious and wanted to be really, really good at what I did. And so just sort of meandered through a few different roles in the tech industry. And then when I was at business school, I took a course in product management. And I also spoke to a bunch of alumni who were in the role. And that's when I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And it's been 6-7 years now, and I think I made the right decision.
That's awesome. So you said you were speaking to alumni and you found out about product management, but what made it like so interesting to you? Like what aspects of the role made you want to jump?
Yeah, I think it's a lot about serving customers, figuring out what their stated needs are, also what their latent needs are, and then just the creative exercise of coming up with the right set of functionality, features to deliver delight to customers. So that's what was really interesting about the role. I also had the opportunity to work with engineers while not actually writing code for a living. That's what drew me to the role.
Okay, awesome. So Siddharth, you've worked as a PM in the US and now in India. What would you say are the key differences in product management?
I'll say the PM ecosystem in India is evolving super quickly. And at this point, I don't think there's any perceivable difference in product managers and the craft of product management really between India and the US. So if you look 20 years ago, if you wanted to build products for a global audience, chances were that you'd had to immigrate, right, to the West. I think that started changing 20 years ago. And India was largely looked at as a way to surge capacity. So you'd have a few engineers sort of tagged to teams in the US or Europe, and then you'd have the one odd product manager, right? And then over the last 10 years, I think entire charters have started moving to India. You'd be surprised at how many of the products that you use are actually built out of India, although they're not quote unquote built for India or built for Bharat. They're global products, but they're very much built out of places within a 10-kilometer radius from where we are. So it's an exciting time. And I think this is a secular trend. So I'll say over the last 20 years, it's been a pretty interesting journey for product management in India. And I think we are at a level footing now.
So would you say India is one of the best places to be for aspiring product managers right now?
Absolutely. I think the ecosystem here is really, really strong. There are few corners in the world. I'll say the west coast of the US, the east coast of China, Israel, and then India. Right? There are few bright spots where top-tier tech talent can really build the next set of amazing products, and India is very much in the mix.
Okay, and you spoke about tech a lot. So, I mean, there are a bunch of people who don't come with a tech background. What do you think they should do to be able to get into like a role at Google as a product manager? Is it even possible?
I'll say yes, it is possible. I think if you look at the PM skill set, it's adjacent to engineering, it's adjacent to sales, it's adjacent to finance and marketing. So you need to know a little bit about all of these disciplines, but you don't necessarily have to be an expert at any one of them. You really need to be an expert at empathizing with the customer, figuring out what their direct and latent needs are, being able to communicate with engineering at the level of detail that is required, and also being able to work with sales and marketing to sell the product, right? Now, this skill set isn't really, at least till date, taught in a single program, right? So you don't have to be an engineer. I think being an engineer helps to communicate with engineers. And for a large chunk of the day, especially if you work in enterprise software, for example, you spend a lot of time with engineers. So it helps, but it's not mandatory. So you could come from any background. I think there are a lot of examples, successful ones, of folks who moved from design, folks who moved from marketing, folks who moved from finance, even folks who moved from talk writing, right? Who've become very successful PMs in their own right at companies that I've worked at. Like I've seen this trend across Microsoft, Salesforce, Google, and indeed across industries. So you don't need to have a technical background. It helps, but you don't need it.
Okay, awesome. So Siddharth, you've worked at Salesforce, Microsoft, and now Google. In retrospect, what would you say are the top 3 lessons you've learned after working for so long in such diverse companies?
I think all 3 companies are phenomenal. All 3 companies, regardless of their perception in the media, are very customer-centric, right? But they're also very, very different. They're culturally very different, and the way the PM role is delivered is also very different, right? So it reflects the founder's DNA in some ways. So let me take the example of Salesforce. It was founded by someone who was a sales leader, right? And so the culture is more fratty, more salesy, and it's a phenomenal company to work for, right? But the sales team has a lot of say in what's on the roadmap, more so than the other 2 companies that I worked at, right? Microsoft, I think, wins at distribution, right? They have an incredible field, and that allows Microsoft to have more shots on goal. What do I mean by that, right? You cut to 2017 or 2018, and you'd hear about Slack and Zoom, right? And in there, right, they're fantastic products, right? And you'd argue that better products mean better business, right? And then came Microsoft, right? The relationships that Microsoft has with leading companies allows them to have more shots on goal, iterate quickly, and then arrive at a much stronger product. And the results are there to speak for themselves, right? I think Google is very different from the other 2. I think Microsoft, although they have a consumer business, is largely driven by enterprise. Salesforce is almost completely a enterprise business. Google is phenomenally successful on the consumer side, although they've really pushed hard on Google Cloud. And I think if you carved out Google Cloud today, it would be by itself the 5th largest enterprise software company in the world, right? So we've come very far in a short period of time. And so the culture is evolving a little bit, I'll say, but it's extremely customer-centric. And Google really believes in empowering engineers, right? So engineers have the opportunity to get involved in product building much earlier than I saw at Salesforce and Microsoft, to sit in on customer conversations, to self-host competitor products. These are things that I didn't really see happen as regularly at Salesforce or Microsoft, but engineers tend to be like a Swiss Army knife, especially at a leadership role. They tend to do a lot more things than just write code, right? Which is really interesting. And because the engineers feel as empowered, I think the pace of growth, the ownership that engineers feel towards product is at a different level, and that translates into great products as well. So again, Salesforce, Microsoft, and Google are very different companies. They compete in some markets, cooperate in others, but they're all successful in their own right. And so as a PM, I think you've probably heard this before, but PM role at different companies is very, very different. And that's certainly been my experience.
So Siddharth, now you hire PMs, and one question a lot of aspiring PMs want to know is what kind of skills are needed to become a PM. And personally, I want to know, is there a certain personality type that you need to have to become a PM?
I'm glad you asked that question, actually. So I think a lot has been written about PM interviewing, right? And even more so, PM interviewing at Google. So if you get to YouTube and just search for it, you'll have dozens of videos, including by ex-recruiters at Google. So I think they do a much better job of talking about the resume skills that you may need to demonstrate in the interview process. But I think to your point of personality, I think there are resume traits and there are character traits or personality traits, however you want to put it. And candidly, the people that I have seen do well, who may not necessarily be the best interviewers, but are rockstar PMs, have an axe to grind. They have a bit of a chip on their shoulder, and I think it comes from a shock to their system. I'm no psychologist, but I think having a shock to your system early on does help a little bit. So maybe you were shunned. Maybe you were not the most popular kid in school. Maybe you were in a vicious competition with your best friend, right? Or maybe you were asked to live up to an elder sibling who you never measured up to. And so these people are a little ticked off, and they spend the rest of their life trying to prove that they're worthy. They try to validate themselves, prove that they're worthy, not just to other people, but mostly to themselves. And these people don't need motivational talks, right? They will go and take the next hill. You just need to point them. And I think the PMs that do the best have this mindset. And it's been written about. Some people call it high agency. Some people call it a founder's mentality. But really, I think the thing that really separates the top 1% PMs that I've worked with is this incredible drive.
But if you had to also tell us a couple of resume skills that are probably that are must-haves, what would they be?
I think it really helps to be in the product building ecosystem. So you may be an engineer, for example, you may be a designer, you may be a marketer for products, and you could be a marketer for FMCG products. But you need to have participated in the product building process across industries. I think that gives you a bit of an edge. So that's something that we might look for, especially at slightly more senior levels. I think having prior product experience is very, very useful. I think you need to be able to demonstrate design skills. And again, there's plenty written on this. I know people who will narrate Lewis Lin to me backwards. So the design X for Y. But what we're really trying to understand is, hey, for a new persona that you may not embody, that you may not live in your real life, can you empathize? Can you figure out, without trying to interview customers all the time to figure out, can you figure out very quickly what that particular persona might struggle with, and then figure out, therefore, what needs to be built from an experience perspective that might help the persona that you're trying to serve. So I think empathy is really important. Critically, I'd say candidly, that's the essence of the design X for Y questions, right, which we try to get at. So I think having empathy and then having some experience in the product building lifecycle definitely helps.
Okay, awesome. You've been a PM for a while, Siddharth, and I'm sure you've probably made mistakes along the way. What were those mistakes, and how do you think early and aspiring PMs can avoid making such mistakes?
Yeah, I made lots of mistakes. I think a lot of people come into the role thinking about the tool set. So I have these conversations with people who are in consulting, people who are in investment banking, who are thinking about moving into product management. And their question is, do you use Jira, right? And that sort of tells you that they haven't completely grokked what the role really is, right? So yes, it's about tool set. I think the next evolution is sort of thinking about the skill set. So can you talk to customers? Can you really listen for what customers are looking for? Can you roll up your sleeves, buy a competitor product, spend a weekend sort of playing with it, right? Almost be a power user for your competitor product. And I think those are good skills to have. But I think more than anything, it's about mindset, right? It's about the so what and the now what, which is, okay, you have 10 competitors, you've self-hosted all of their products, you know them like the back of your hand. How are you going to differentiate your product? What's the secret sauce? And maybe there isn't any. Maybe the secret sauce is distribution. But you need to have a holistic point of view on why your product is going to win. And honestly, that's why you get paid the big bucks, right? It's not to 20 customer interviews, which I think beyond your first year becomes second nature. It's not to host competitor products. I think especially if you're in consumer, you probably use these products on a day-to-day basis. In enterprise, it's a little bit different. But hosting products isn't the challenge. The real challenge is figuring out what to build based on these signals. By the way, also looking at support tickets, for example, to understand what's the messy area of your product so you can address it, right? So you get paid for the mindset, for the so what and the now what. It's useful to have the tool set, right? Just because you drive to work every day doesn't make you a driver, right? And so you're not a Jira administrator. You're using Jira as a vehicle to figure out what to build, when to get it out to market, and so on and so forth. I think that graduation from tool set to skill set to mindset is something that I'd encourage early in career PMs to think about.
So thank you so much, Siddharth. You've been extremely generous with your knowledge and your tips. And I'm sure everyone who's watching this, as well as our community of learners, they're going to learn a lot. And we hope to have you back. We have a bunch of projects we want to keep doing with PMs. And yes, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Dia. I think you folks at Airtribe are doing a phenomenal job in growing our ecosystem. So thank you for doing what you do. And I'd love to be involved.